education and beyond. My name is Natasha Pay, and I'm pleased to introduce our webinar guest speakers, Joe March and Lora Pesant. Joe March is Partnership Manager with SmartSAVER, the National Education Savings Advocate working to raise the profile of the Canada Learning Bond. He provides support to family-facing social service agencies and other organizations across Canada that can tell the Learning Bond story and help parents access it. Prior to joining SmartSAVER, Joe spent decades working in the Canadian media in senior editorial and marketing roles. And Lora Pesant is a financial literacy facilitator at Momentum. Her current work involves a two-generation approach to poverty reduction as she helps Calgarian families to access government benefits for their children's future education. She studied conflict resolution at the University of Winnipeg and has worked in the areas of community development and advocacy in Canada and New Zealand. So welcome to both of you. We're so glad you could join us today to talk about the opportunity that the Canada Learning Bond presents to us, to our families and communities in education and poverty reduction. So I think we'll start with Joe today first. You can give us more overview of what the Canada Learning Bond is and what it can do for low-income families. So Joe, my first question to you is kind of about the concept of SmartSAVER. It's great. We know that positive government policies can make positive impacts for families and communities, and you're helping people access and make use of the existing dollars out there. So for those of us who are new to the concept of the Canada Learning Bond, can you just describe a bit about the fund and what your role is at SmartSAVER and speak to some of the evidence that says this is a program that can make a real difference?
Well, sure, Natasha, thank you. The federal government and some provincial governments have established programs for education savings that respond to families' needs, especially families living on lower incomes. The Canada Education Savings Program, which is administered by the Employment and Social Development in Ottawa, includes tax-free education savings accounts, matching grants for contributions into those accounts, and the Canada Learning Bond, up to $2,000 for children born since 2004 living in families with modest incomes. We at SmartSAVER partner with organizations across Canada to help programs and collaborative initiatives like yours reach eligible children and get them started saving for post-secondary education. Statistics from Employment and Social Development Canada show that 97% of families who receive the Canada Learning Bond, that free government kickstart, do find ways to start saving their own money once an RESP is established, even though no contribution is required. So SmartSAVER's only goal is to improve children's and families' access, first to registered education savings plans, then the Canada Learning Bond and provincial savings incentives. It's important to note that we don't sell or provide financial products in any way. Prior to our national launch in January of 2015, a 3-year pilot of SmartSAVER in Toronto taught us that working in collaboration with the federal government, with financial institutions, and with family-facing community organizations, by doing that, we can improve access and participation in these beneficial savings programs. Our 5-year goal at SmartSAVER is to push the national take-up of the CLB, the Canada Learning Bond, to 40%. It currently sits at just about 34% nationally. We hope communities will think of SmartSAVER as a support or a springboard for their work, and that they'll find our free educational enrollment tools, like our online application Start My RESP, easy to use and adapt to help them promote RESPs and the Canada Learning Bond in their communities. So research demonstrates that establishing savings for kids who are living on lower incomes for their future education sets in motion what we call a chain reaction of success. The establishment of an RESP motivates a family to save. A family's growing investment in an education fund builds a child's commitment towards school and their confidence to pursue and complete post-secondary and higher education. That leads to improved employability, earnings, and financial stability. Children with as little as $3,000 in savings are more likely to graduate from high school. And children as young as 11 begin to assess whether college or some other form of post-secondary education is financially possible for them, and they'll alter their school-focused goals and the effort they put into school accordingly. And youth who have even small amounts of savings set aside for their education are 50% more likely to pursue higher education than youth with no savings. We believe that providing an impetus toward saving, toward building assets instead of planning to borrow for education, can have an impact in the family beyond the obvious. In many cases, it's a first experience of savings, of building a financial plan toward a future goal, of meeting and working with a financial institution, and developing a successful relationship.
Thanks, Joe. So the Canada Learning Bond is one part of a larger program that provides the means for children to attend higher levels of education. So how do all these pieces fit together? Are there a lot of hoops to jump through? Is there other money that could be available for families in our communities?
Well, let's take a look, in fact, at the Canada Education Savings Program. It's the registered, the first part of that is the Registered Education Savings Plan, or RESP. That's that mayonnaise jar you see on this screen there. The RESP is a tax-sheltered account, and it's required to receive any of the federal or provincial benefits associated with education savings. It's important to remember that this is the first step to accessing any of the other program benefits. Allison, if you click the mouse again, a little coin will go into the jar. The second component we're talking about today is the Canada Learning Bond, and that's the kickstart contribution by the federal government into the RESP for parents living on lower income. An initial grant of $500 is followed by an additional $100 per year to a maximum of $2,000 depending on eligibility. I will click again, and the third piece of the program is the Canada Education Savings Grant. That's the matching incentive grant that a lot of people do know about. It's designed to motivate and reward a family's contribution to an RESP. The fourth component may be hiding behind this. Oh, there it is, the provincial grants. Those grants are available currently in 3 provinces where they're available. And let's take a look now at the components of the Canada Education Savings Program in more detail. We'll go to the next slide. So as mentioned, a Registered Education Savings Plan, or RESP, is the receiving account that's required for federal benefits like the Canada Learning Bond and the Canada Education Savings Grant, as well as provincial benefits where they're available. Remember that an RESP is a tax-sheltered account, and that means that any money in the account, including the government grants, can grow free from tax while the money is in the account. This benefits families as money from an RESP is withdrawn ultimately by the student when they're ready to attend higher education, and that's when the money is taxed, and the student likely has very little or no income, and so the tax burden on the money as it's being withdrawn is very low, if at all. It's really important to also understand that families have a variety of RESP plans and providers to choose from, and there's a wide range of conditions and costs associated with different RESP products. At SmartSAVER, we really don't get into the different investment options, but I do want to stress that RESP accounts that have no fees and require no minimum contribution are available through a number of financial institutions, including all 6 that participate in SmartSAVER's online application that we're going to look at a little later. So that means a family can literally open an RESP with $0. So there are still many myths around RESPs, which SmartSAVER and its community partners work to dispel. And that's really the basis of the work that we do in communities. Many people believe that receiving the Canada Learning Bond will affect other benefits that a family receives, and this actually is not true. Opening an RESP and collecting the Canada Learning Bond or any available provincial grant does not affect provincial or federal benefits in any province. RESP benefits are considered asset and income exempt for the purpose of any social assistance. Another myth surrounds how funds in a child's RESP can be used. And really important to clear up this myth. In reality, the federal government has made the RESP very flexible, so a child can use the money in their account to pursue a wide range of post-secondary education options. So right now, that includes part-time as well as full-time studies in Canada or somewhere else in the world. You can also use an RESP to pay for apprenticeship programs or trade school, almost anything offered by an accredited educational organization, not just traditional college or university programs. Across the country, in fact, there are literally thousands of accredited institutions that you can use money from an RESP to pay for their programs. In Ontario, for example, there are over 250 different institutions that you can use your RESP money to pay for. The last small note I want to leave you with on RESP accounts is that it does not have to be opened by a parent. An RESP can be opened by a relative, a public caregiver, or even a friend. But the person opening the account always has to have the child's social insurance number and the primary caregiver's SIN number, because federal benefit eligibility is assessed at the primary caregiver's income level. So let's look more specifically now at the Canada Learning Bond. And that's the second component of the overall Canada Education Savings Program, the first coin that went into our mayonnaise jar. The Canada Learning Bond gets education savings started even when parents can't contribute themselves. The Canada Learning Bond, or CLB, is available to families currently, the net family income of $45,282 or less. Another way of establishing income eligibility is whether or not the parents are receiving now or have ever received the National Child Benefit Supplement as part of the Canada Child Tax Credit. And the Canada Learning Bond is available to, only available to children born since January 2004 or later, so 12 years old or younger. We'll go to the next slide. To get the CLB, a family must open an RESP account and apply, as we've talked about. And that's it. It's really that simple. The CLB is thought of as a kickstart contribution into the RESP. An initial $500 has $100 added each year that a child is eligible, up to $2,000, or up to the child's 15th birthday. A family doesn't need to put a single dollar to receive the Canada Learning Bond. And the grant is retroactive, which means that when an eligible family applies for the CLB, their first deposit includes the initial $500 as well as $100 for each previous year the child was eligible. So for example, if an eligible family applies for the bond when their child is 5 years old and the child has always been eligible, the first deposit will actually be $1,000. We at SmartSAVER believe the Canada Learning Bond is an incredible opportunity for parents to get savings started, even if they have no money of their own to contribute. And even though the Canada Learning Bond is free, you'll remember an earlier slide, there are currently 1.5 million eligible children who aren't receiving the $700+ million available for their future education. And just to put that in perspective, that's half the children in Canada aged 12 and under are eligible for the Canada Learning Bond, or at some point in their lives have been eligible. And as we said, the national take-up rate is hovering at only about a third of eligible children receiving money they're entitled to. So we'll go to the next slide. At this point, we've covered basic RESP accounts and the CLB. The federal government also offers an extra incentive to help motivate families to save in an RESP. And that's the matching grant called the Canada Education Savings Grant. That's the one most people do know about, and it adds more money to an RESP when a family contributes their own money. Everyone who starts an RESP, regardless of income, is eligible for some matching money. But the federal government provides a bigger match the lower a family's income. So for example, for every $100 that a family contributes to an RESP, the government deposits an extra $40, $30, or $20, depending on the family's income. And it doesn't matter who contributes into that RESP. If a grandparent or a friend wants to contribute into that account, into the education savings account of that child, the matching incentive is still added. Lastly, as I mentioned before, there are 3 provinces currently that have extra programs available for families to receive even more funds for their children's RESP. The BC Training and Education Savings Grant is a new provincial program that gives all BC children born in 2007 or later an additional $1,200. To access the grant, families must open an RESP and apply before the child turns 9. Now, that grant was introduced just this past August. The Saskatchewan Advantage Grant for Education Savings, or SAGES, is an extra matching grant of 10% rather, on family contributions into an RESP, up to a maximum of $250 per child per year, and a maximum lifetime SAGES grant of $4,500 per child. And the final provincial savings incentive is the Quebec Education Savings Incentive. It also provides an extra 10% match on contributions per year for Quebec's children's RESPs. The maximum match in Quebec is also $250 per year, with a maximum lifetime grant of $3,600.
Thanks, Joe. And so with all of this funding available, you mentioned there's over $700 million of unused funds, and 2/3 of eligible children aren't accessing it. So what are the challenges? What are some of the barriers that you're seeing to be able to access this? Something that stands out to me is the need for low-income families to have a social insurance number, or maybe some issues with immigration. So can Canadian-born children of parents who aren't yet citizens access the fund?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are 3 main barriers to enrollment, and really that's what we discovered during our pilot project. First, there is generally speaking, there's a low awareness about RESPs and the CLB across Canada, which is one of the reasons why we're having this conversation today, is to help people tell the story of the Canada Learning Bond. There is product confusion as well. Families are either unaware of RESPs, or they don't really understand how they differ, and they do differ by provider. And the fact that they're having difficulty understanding costs, conditions, potential risks associated with some RESP products has held some families back. Thirdly, and you touched on this, Natasha, the multi-step administration process required to start an RESP and apply for the extra grants deters a number of parents. So, if you work backwards, an RESP cannot be registered without social insurance numbers for both the parent and the child. It's needed to confirm their entitlement to government benefits. Getting the social insurance number also requires a birth certificate, and while an RESP can be started for free, and getting a SIN number is also free, a birth certificate costs money. It can cost $25, it can cost even more than that, and that can get in the way for a number of parents. And you also talked about newcomers, the children of newcomers to Canada, and whether or not their children could be eligible. In fact, any child with a social insurance number in Canada, even a social insurance number that is a Series 9 SIN number, so generally speaking, newly landed immigrants, refugees, anyone with a social insurance number in Canada and has the income eligibility and is the right age is in fact eligible for the Canada Learning Bond. So refugees, new arrivals, a child does not have to be Canadian born to be eligible for the Canada Learning Bond. So, we designed an online application that's available at SmartSAVER, and it helps families overcome some of these barriers, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, great. And so understanding some of these challenges, and you just touched on the online application, what kinds of solutions, tools, or support do you offer to families and organizations who would like to access or help other families access the RESP funding?
Well, first off, through our website, smartsaver.org, we offer non-biased information about RESPs and the Canada Learning Bond. The website actually builds on the federal information that's also available, of course, to any Canadian who wants to access it. We've tried to make things a little more user-friendly, tried to make them appear and function a little more with the consumer in mind. So, you know, on the website, we think it is friendlier and easier to use. And we've developed with partners across the country a wide variety of print and video tools, most of which are available in up to 16 languages. So trying to knock that, you know, that information barrier down. Users can learn what they need to on our website before they open an RESP and apply for the Canada Learning Bond. We also provide telephone and email support through our smartsaver.org, and really connecting with family-facing organizations across the country and understanding how they're working in their communities, and then just trying to provide support to them to tell the Canada Learning Bond story, you know, is another important way that we work in the community to try and knock those barriers down. If we go to the next slide, yeah, there we are. So here's a resource that we've developed. It's something that frontline workers should be familiar with. It's not a requirement to work with smartsaver.org that people use Start My RESP, which is our online application, but it also has been designed to try and knock some of those barriers down. Understanding more about Start My RESP can help frontline workers explain it to the families they work with, and maybe even walk them through the process themselves. So it's easy to access Start My RESP. You see it's circled there. Just click that button, and SmartSaver and the family can get going. If we go to the next slide, the application, Start My RESP, is available in English and French, and there is support currently in Mandarin, Spanish, and Punjabi. The application takes less than 10 minutes to complete. And the way it works is it collects all of the information required for the federal government's Canada Learning Bond and the Canada Education Savings Grant application, instantly and securely transmitting it to a family's selected financial institution. We currently work through Start My RESP with 6 financial institutions: BMO, Meridian Credit Union in Ontario, RBC, Scotiabank, TD, and then City Credit Union in BC have come together to help us in the Start My RESP initiative. I should point out the CIBC will also be one of our close partners by the end of the summer. So each of these financial institutions is committed to establishing RESPs for families living on lower income that have no fees and no minimum contribution required. So that gives families the account required to access the CLB and the matching grants. Go to the next slide. So the way it works is after receiving an application submitted through smartsaver.org, the applicant's selected financial institution will contact the applicant over the phone to complete the process of opening the RESP account. They'll be invited to set an appointment at a local branch, or in the case of BMO, they can do it over the phone. All they're required to do at that appointment is to bring proof of identity and sign the application. You just click that button, Allison. It'll kind of roll through the application a little bit. So once the account is set up, the applicant's financial institution submits the paperwork to the federal government. If the child meets eligibility criteria for the CLB, the money is deposited into the RESP account, all with no contribution required. Usually takes about 60 days for the money to go in. And if the family does decide to make contributions to the RESP, the application they completed online enables them to receive the matching grant. It's really that easy, and as you can see, it's pretty friendly. It takes about 10 minutes to complete. And then if there are any questions that arise during the Start My RESP's application process, we offer live support for all applicants through email, info@smartsaver.org, and our toll-free number. You can see it there, and of course any of the organizations on that slide will be able to steer people toward resources that can help them answer questions. So the next slide, we talk a little bit and provide people with connectivity to the federal government's 188 number. That's where people can go, people who already have RESPs. They can find out if they have the Canada Learning Bond. They can find out if their RESP is active. They can find out if matching grants have been made and if there's any room available. They can even find out who the provider is. Many times you'll meet with families who will know they have an RESP, but maybe it's been a while since they've accessed it or have paid the kind of attention to it to tell them whether or not, in fact, they've applied for the Canada Learning Bond. Not all RESP providers will automatically do that. And then next slide, in addition to the online application, I mentioned that we help organizations promote the CLB. We work to provide training so staff and volunteers can feel confident in the information they're sharing. And I mentioned simple, customizable, printable materials that organizations can use to support and promote these benefits to the families they work with. And typically, we do encourage people to use resources like the federal government's Canada.ca website to search for education savings or the Canada Learning Bond, and they'll be provided with the federal government's information, which is now available actually in 12 languages. And we encourage staff and volunteers from family-facing social service agencies and other organizations to familiarize themselves with resources that are available through us. If you go to the next slide, you'll see our community website, which is packed with resources and contacts across Canada who are already working to promote the CLB and improve family access. We also, this is the right place as well to subscribe to our blog, which allows you to stay in touch with what's happening. SmartSAVER also offers financial support to organizations through our community incentive program. We know that organizations are juggling a lot of competing priorities and have scarce resources to help families access the CLB. So our community incentive is designed to help offset costs that may be incurred into helping families use the online application. It might even be helpful as a small revenue generator. Some of the organizations that work with us use it as a fundraiser. And this is really thanks to our funders, organizations like the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation and the Metcalf Foundation, and even our financial institution partners. We're able, through this program, to offer a $25 incentive for each online application that an organization helps a family to complete. And I'm happy to provide information on how organizations can join this program, and you can reach us through our website. I should mention as well that everyone who registered for today's webinar will be receiving a special Canada Learning Bond Action Kit with a sampling of tools designed to help them tell the Canada Learning Bond stories and help parents open no-cost RESPs. You'll see the special action map, which guides staff and volunteers through the Learning Bond conversation, the quick reference to government incentives for families. There's a SmartSAVER Learning Bond poster and a SmartSAVER info sheet that includes directions to our community website, a digital community where organizations can promote, who are promoting the bond, can come together, and where digital files of reproducible tools can be found and shared.
That's great. Thanks so much, Joe, for sharing the toolkit with us and some of your insight into how we can mobilize funding that's already available for low-income families to improve educational aspirations and achievement. One of the things that we see recurring in poverty reduction strategies across the country is the education pillar. And setting kids up for success is one of those critical ways we can improve the likelihood of decent income, decent employment, and put an end to generational poverty. So we'll send the toolkit around to everybody with the SmartSAVER website links that you mentioned following the webinar, also with the webinar recording and the PowerPoint slides. So if you're looking for those, you will receive them in a couple of days. So we have a couple of communities on the line who are doing some of the work that you just introduced, Joe, mobilizing communities and organizations to help families access the Canada Learning Bond. And just before we go to Lora in Calgary, we actually have Jason Fuith on the line with us from the Winnipeg Mayor's office. They announced the Winnipeg Promise at the city's Reducing Poverty Summit last April. So I just wanted to welcome Jason. Thanks for being on the line with us today. We talked a little bit just before we came on, and I'm wondering if you can explain to everybody on the line briefly what the Winnipeg Promise is, what the role you're playing with it is, and some of the feedback you're getting on the program so far.
For sure, and thanks a lot for the time to speak today. So the as was mentioned, so the mayor announced the Winnipeg Promise at the city's Reducing Poverty conference a couple months ago in Edmonton. And what happened in our community here was the work that SmartSAVER was doing, I think parallel or supported some of the other work going on locally with groups like Seed Winnipeg, and that work's progressed to another organization in town that picked it up, saying this is a great opportunity. How can we further improve the subscription rate for the Canada Learning Bond? And so one of the groups that looked at it was the Winnipeg Boldness Project, which is a social lab in town that's intended to prototype concepts to take them to a point where they could be scaled. That also had involvement from Seed was involved, United Way was involved, and it's already been mentioned once before today is the J.W. McConnell Foundation was part of it as well. And what they did was they looked at one of our communities here in Winnipeg that had a very acute sort of low subscription rate, and it was in our Point Douglas area that combined low income and one of our community groups, which is the Indigenous community, that had a even sort of further lower rate of subscription. And so the challenge was, how do we address the barriers, or how does the Winnipeg Boldness Project address those barriers and change the station in terms of that community? So they did that, and they developed the core group of barriers, at least in our local community, that needed to be addressed. And they've been touched on today, and just to highlight them again, the few that really stand out are awareness, the multi-step process, and the birth certificate are kind of the ones that bubble up to the top. And they were looking for a way to take the next step, and that's really where the mayor stepped in, having had a conversation with Winnipeg Boldness and the McConnell Foundation, was to look at this as a community issue, and leveraging the mayor's office in what the mayor would say is sort of his ability to convene the community together and bring the different voices to the table. And so at the city's Reducing Poverty conference, the Winnipeg Promise was announced, which is effectively a steering committee of different community leaders from very different sectors to come together to take a very pragmatic approach to the barriers and basically address them. And so we have at the table the health representatives from our regional health authority, education authority, or education community, from the financial industry, from the business community, from the general social kind of support community, political support, and they're all around the table to basically walk through the barriers and address them one at a time. And we haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, and that's coming up in the next 2 weeks, but already side conversations have started. So we were approached by the Canadian government and were advised that there are mobile sign-up I guess groups that will go to different events and sign up for the social insurance number, but the problem is you need the birth certificate, and that's typically a two-part process. And there is that here in Manitoba, there is a $30 fee for the birth certificate, and that's an obstacle. And so we've already had conversations with the business community who've indicated certainly in the early stages they'd be willing to support the birth certificate fee, and we've already had initial, very early discussions with the provincial government to see whether or not there's something else we could do that's sort of more long-term. So these discussions are already started, and the community is really starting to rally together to take what has been identified by Winnipeg Boldness and all the work that's already been done and identified by SEED and by SmartSAVER, take those all together, really distill or make them very clear in terms of our local issues, and then really start sitting down and solving them one at a time to convert our subscription rate, which is quite low, ultimately to what the number should be, which is 100%. So that's kind of the Winnipeg story and the Winnipeg promise as it is right now. And in the coming weeks, like I mentioned, the mayor is going to be convening that committee for the first time, and we are hoping in not too short order to really put in place those solution steps to really start tackling the issue locally.
Thanks, Jason. I think it's such an interesting initiative that started with the community and that can fit so many different sectors, or find a role for so many different sectors to play a part in this this tool for poverty reduction. You mentioned, the mayor's office, the municipality, the business sector, the province. So I think we'll definitely be looking to hear what happens in the next couple of weeks. We'll keep our ears open. So now we'll go over to Lora in Calgary. Lora is the Financial Literacy Facilitator for Momentum, which is an economic development society working to improve financial literacy with programs such as the Canada Learning Bond. Momentum is one of the 4 key partners of the community-wide Calgary Poverty Reduction Initiative. And I'll let Lora introduce Momentum, some of the work she does, and their role with the Calgary Poverty Reduction Initiative.
Thanks, Natasha. So as Natasha said, we're a community economic development organization. We're Calgary-based, a nonprofit, of course. We work with people who are underemployed or living on a low income to help them move out of poverty. We started in 1991, and our initial focus was on providing trades training to new Canadians. We now have 3 departments: skills training, business development, and financial literacy. And within our financial literacy department, we have free community money management classes, match savings programs, and a program called StartSmart that's focused on savings and helping families access the Canada Learning Bond, which is what we'll be talking about today. And a little bit about the StartSmart program. We started in 2008. We were originally, if you go to the back, the last slide there, yeah, thank you. We started in 2008, and we started out being funded by the Education Savings Community Outreach, or ESCO, which is the federal government, and we were funded until March of 2014. And right now we have a variety of different funders that are funding organizations with families living on low incomes, which translates into over 4,600 StartSmart workshop participants, resulting in 1,560 RESPs opened since 2008. And since 2014, we've started training community champions. So we've started doing a training program, having the community organizations do the work in sharing Canada Learning Bond information with their participants, and that has resulted in over 400 RESPs open. So we're one of many programs that are across the country that's focused on education savings and the Canada Learning Bond, and we're really Calgary focused. We have done training across Alberta, and that was mostly because there used to be a provincial grant called the Alberta Centennial Education Savings Program that ended last year in July, and so we wanted as many people to sign up for this grant as possible before it ended, of course. And so we ended up doing a lot of training across the province as well as within Calgary, but most of our 150 community champions that we've trained are within Calgary. So the process of StartSmart is the first thing that we do is, the main thing is community workshops with parents. So we partner with trusted community organizations that are serving families who live on low incomes. And we set up community workshops. So this could be in parent link centers, it could be in, we partner with English as a second language schools, basically anybody who works with parents, and they have groups of parents that come together. So Alberta Health Services also is a strong community partner of ours as well. And we provide information about RESPs and how to access the Canada Learning Bond. We have all of our information in plain language. We also refer a lot to SmartSAVER because of the 16 different languages. And a lot of the workshops that we have in the communities either offer childcare, transportation subsidies, or children are very welcome to come to the work. It's fun and interesting, but we want the information to get out there, and we want as many barriers broken down as possible. We also offer individual follow-up support, so everybody who comes to a workshop and they say that they have children who qualify, especially for the Canada Learning Bond, and they haven't received it, we actually phone them and ask them if they have any questions, if they need any help with getting the RESP open. And if people, so as Joe and Jason were talking about, the barriers, some of the barriers to getting an RESP could be that parents don't have ID or they don't have a birth certificate for their children. And so we're able to subsidize their identification. So we have a partnership with a registry that is in downtown Calgary, and so we get their information and we send it to them, and we say that we're able to pay for their ID. So it's up to the parent to go in and get the ID, but we're able to pay for it there. We also have a Bank Buddy volunteer program, so if somebody's not feeling completely confident in going to a bank meeting, then we can have either a volunteer or a facilitator go along to the appointment with them. And really big referral, we like to send people to StartMyRESP.ca that's run by SmartSAVER because of how amazing and easy the whole process is, and the language support and all of that. So, and then one other thing that we've started doing too is the free money parties or Canada Learning Bond enrollment events, where we have financial institutions to come to a central location, and so we're hosting one at Momentum on June 2nd. And all of the different financial institutions come, and we have families come as well. There's children's activities, and people can access the Canada Learning Bond on the spot and talk to a financial institution on the spot. And so that's a model that we actually have adopted from SmartSAVER. SmartSAVER was running a lot of those events, and as well as other organizations across the country, and we decided to bring it to Calgary, and we have mostly been successful so far, as long as we spend a lot of energy marketing it and make sure that a lot of families come out to it. So if you go to the next slide, please. As Joe was saying, there are 2/3 of Canadian children who are not accessing this money, and we can share the information with as many families as possible, but we're not able to reach absolutely everybody on our own at Momentum. And so one big thing that we're focusing on is training community organizations who work directly with families, and we're able to provide follow-up support as well if they need help co-facilitating workshops, if they need help with answering any questions or any referrals at all. We want to be there to help the communities share this information. Recently, we've been doing Canada Learning Bond presentations at financial institutions in targeted communities with high Canada Learning Bond eligible children. And we've found that a lot of financial institution staff actually don't know what the Canada Learning Bond is, or they have heard about it, but they don't know exactly how it works. So we've been focusing a lot on having a goal to have everybody who works in a branch be familiar with the Canada Learning Bond and be able to share Canada Learning Bond information. with families, and we found that to be great so far. They've been very receptive in having us, and I think that it is really important for the people who are issuing these RESPs that they're very familiar with the bond and how important it is. Right now, so within the Calgary Poverty Reduction Initiative, we have the Financial Empowerment Collaborative. And within the Financial Empowerment Collaborative, there's 6 different initiatives. Education Savings is one of the initiatives, and we actually have an action team that has various community organizations on it and financial institutions, and we're focused on helping people within Calgary access the Canada Learning Bond as well. And so that's, we organize RESP sign-up events and help to think of ideas as to how to reduce barriers as well. Momentum has a public policy team, and part of the advocacy work that's been going on with the public policy team was to ideally keep the provincial grant, which unfortunately didn't happen for various reasons, and to advocate for social housing asset limits. So Joe said before that it does not affect asset limits for social programs, and that is completely true. There was Social Housing Act hadn't been updated for a very long time before the Canada Learning Bond came into existence, and so a couple of years ago it was brought to our attention that Calgary Housing was making it not possible to access their services if they had more than $5,000 combined assets. It's either $5,000 or $7,000, I'm sorry, I don't remember. And RESPs were included in that. And so just recently legislation has passed that social housing is no longer going to be looking at RESPs as asset limits. So that's a huge success there. And then we're also looking at incorporating Canada Learning Bond info within larger systems. So we had a meeting with the Calgary Board of Education. We're working on having the healthcare board and hospital packages have Canada Learning Bond, and they're able to share it, and then having Canada Learning Bond information at tax clinics as well. And so the last thing that I'll finish off with is just a story. So this is Ashley Clearsky, and she joined one of our financial literacy programs, and this is just her story there. So she became a teenage mother, and she really needed every ounce of her determination to succeed. And she joined Momentum's financial literacy program, began education savings. Ashley's determination is making a difference to the next generation. And then there's a quote from her: "I wanted to beat the statistics and give my son a good quality of life." And that's all from me.
Thanks so much, Laura. I hadn't realized actually how hands-on some of what you guys do at Momentum is, and I think it just really speaks to how the opportunity that's out there with the Canada Learning Bond and what it can offer us. And just between what Jason and you and Joe were saying, I think it's so interesting that, we don't always have to build something up from the ground and do this work from scratch, but there are a lot of opportunities like this federal program that are already out there that we all have a role to play to mobilize it and bring really tangible results for families, as with some of the research that shows, that having this RESP kickstart money can improve high school graduation rates, post-secondary education achievement. So thank you so much for talking with us today. We actually just have a couple of minutes left, so I'm not sure we're going to get to all the questions. I see there are a couple coming through from our attendees on the line, but we actually did have a couple of questions that were submitted before the webinar, so I wanted to touch on a couple of those. Some of them were already answered, but I wonder if one of the questions that Joe or Laura you could speak to is how this resource or opportunity is being communicated to those who would benefit most. So how can we ensure that the information isn't only accessible but intentionally communicated where it's necessary?
Well, you know, Natasha, at SmartSaver, we just encourage family-facing organizations to try and work the CLB as Momentum has into its kind of daily, weekly, month process. So at intake, when a new family might start to working with a particular organization, a great time to provide, you know, the first view of the Canada Learning Bond. We can help organizations even set up landing pages on their own websites where people can access further information and even the application. And just really look for those opportunities through their kind of active day when in fact it makes sense to talk to people in the community. Because the big thing is the organizations that we're talking to today, you're the trusted resources in your communities. One of the biggest reasons no one is taking advantage of the Canada Learning Bond is it's very difficult to believe that there's anything like free money. And so, so we just encourage people to talk as much as they can about the bond.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. And I think it's very important to use the resources that are available through SmartSaver. They've made it really, really easy to share this information, which is so awesome. And then also use models that are going on in different cities, different towns across Canada. I know that I'd like to speak with Jason after this about how it's working in the mayor's office, and that's really where our success has stemmed from as well, is building on other models in other communities too.
Thanks. And the second question that we have there is, how can we better help parents and caregivers manage the costs of early childhood? So, for example, childcare, childhood. So, for example, after-school care, say for post-secondary education.
Well, you know, I work at SmartSaver, so everything for us stems from the Canada Learning Bond, and it's really quite amazing how quickly, when you have a $2,000 jumpstart, how quickly money can add up. We maintain that it's possible to access the CLB without making contributions, but even as little as $5 a week can add up to $10,000 and $12,000 over the period of 15 or 18 savings years for a child. And so it's really getting started early, and using the Canada Learning Bond and opening that RESP in some cases is the first step in developing you know, a wider understanding of finance and personal finance and financial literacy.
In our budgeting workshop, we have an activity that's called Add It Up, and so it's something that you buy regularly every day or every week, that if you cut out, you could be saving a lot of money. So of course, for some families, $5 a week could be a lot of money, but sometimes there are, you know, if we don't purchase, I don't know, a couple coffees or something like that, like if there's maybe one or two things that we take out every week, and we could save $5 a week, then as Joe said, it could be thousands of dollars after 18 years, which may not pay for all of the education, but it changes the dinner time conversation to if I go to school to when I go to school, because there is that money set aside, even if it is just a small amount of money.
That's great. Thanks so much. And I just want to recognize the time. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I think we'll end the question period there, but we'll send out more resources, the webinar recording, all of the items that we talked about, the toolkit, the SmartSaver stuff, to everybody. I want to thank Joe and Laura and Jason for being part of today's broadcast. And thank you to everybody who attended and sent in your questions. We want to make sure we keep in touch. And so we ask you to subscribe to Vibrant Community's monthly newsletter, Cities Connect, for poverty reduction e-news. You also might want to join our online community for poverty reduction practitioners at www.vibrantcommunity.ca. So Allison, if you want to go to the next slide, we have a couple of upcoming learning opportunities with Tamarack that might interest you. Our next webinar will be coming up on June 22nd on evaluations that work, what the sector can learn from ONN and vibrant communities. We'll look at how evaluation works, when it leads to insight and action, because we all know that evaluation can be resource intensive, so it's important to maximize the chances our evaluations are going to work. And in this webinar, the Ontario Nonprofit Network and Tamarack's vibrant communities will consider real examples from individual vibrant communities in order to identify the situations where evaluations worked really well, and also try to identify what made them work well and what lessons we can learn from that. So the link to sign up for that is down at the bottom, and we'll be sending it around after the webinar. And then the next face-to-face meeting opportunity, Tamarack is hosting Deepening Community in Edmonton. It's an event that offers the opportunity to establish relationships, cultivate the ability that comes from giving and receiving care, and offers the possibility to create powerful networks that have the capacity to actively co-create positive futures together. So that link will also be sent around to you after the webinar in an email, and you can contact our colleague Christy at tamarackcommunity.ca if you have any questions about that. In a few days, we'll send the email links with the audio and other material relating to today's call, and we encourage you to email us at natasha@tamarackcommunity.ca to let us know what you thought about today's webinar. So thanks again, everyone, and I hope you have a great day.